I'm Karima Brown. It's time for The Fix. First up, we speak to Sars Commissioner Edward Kieswetter, who called for a government review on using multinational agencies who aided and abetted state capture and almost destroyed the revenue services in the process. Then we look at the moves afoot to put in place rules that will govern just how Parliament may remove the head of a Chapter 9 institution, amid calls for Busisiwe Mkhwebane, the current public protector, to be booted from office. And as is custom, we take a look at what's made headlines in the weekend newspapers and why. The Fix starts now. Welcome to this edition of The Fix, where every Sunday we hold decision makers to account. We tell you why it matters, how it affects you, and why you should care. Now, the government is reviewing its relationship with international firms such as Bain, Gartner and Hogan Lovells, whose reputations were damaged by the work they did for SARS under the leadership of Tom Moyane, who was, of course, fired from his job. Now, SARS suffered an exodus of major staff who were purged from the organization during the time it was run by the state capture forces. Joining me to discuss the way forward is Sars Commissioner Edward Kieswetter. Mr. Commissioner, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us here in the Fix. On the Fix, you spoke to Parliament during the week. I want to get clarity. Are you calling for a review of the relationships or a complete ban on those companies who were actually found to be culpable by the Nugent Commission of Inquiry?
Good morning, Karima. We are very clear that, the cost of state capture is incalculable to the state. We think it's a matter that should be taken seriously and that those who are complicit must be held to account. And so we've made a recommendation that specifically companies like Bain and Gartner, who in our view has some case to answer, that the state should not do business with them. Mm-hmm. So this is a recommendation by SARS. The final decision will be taken by National Treasury. But we are of the view that they will share this concern that we've expressed.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you say that Treasury is the final arbiter on whether or not you do business with a company such as Bain and Gartner, what kind of time frames are we talking about? By when do you expect some direction from Treasury? Because obviously these firms are international advisory companies. Many institutions use them. Other government institutions can use them. So time is, of course, of the essence.
Sure. So there's a process that has to be followed. You know that in the case of Bain, for example, we already recovered some of the money, but that's just the money that they paid plus their interest. That doesn't even get anywhere close to the damage that, if you just think of the revenue decline as a result of their work, the cost is significantly more than the 217 million that they paid back. And so that's the first stream of work. The second is we've referred the matter to the DPCI for further investigation, and that obviously is a criminal investigation.
Yes.
And I think that follows a particular due diligence process, and subject to that, I think if any organization is then found guilty, then the harsh sanctions should be imposed.
Now, how does the sanction work? Let's presume, hypothetically, the Hawks, as you have said, you've referred the matter to, investigates and there's a case. The person that was supposed to appear before the Nugent Commission of Inquiry for Bain faked an illness and fled to Italy. So how are you going to hold them accountable if there is a case that can be made in the courts, for example?
Well, we separate the organization from the individuals. In this case, firstly, we hold Bain as the organization accountable. If the investigation also leads to specific individuals in their fiduciary or official capacity, then clearly the law can follow its course and pursue them as well.
Okay. Now, the reason why I'm specifically speaking about this witness, in the testimony that came out, it was said that the meeting with the South African representative of Bain and the former President Jacob Zuma, under whose watch the state capture project was implemented, had met and was introduced by Dumakand Ndlovu, the well-known scriptwriter and filmmaker. And this was long before Mr. Moyane was even appointed at SARS. So there's a calculatedness about it. There's a premeditated timeline that actually indicates that the decision to capture SARS was calculated and was an essential plan of the state capture project.
Well, the telltale signs definitely supports that, that the actual conversations between the relevant parties took place well ahead of time, and that by the time the Commissioner walked into the position as Sars Commissioner, that their plan had already been formulated. So we feel that there is definitely enough telltale signs for further pursuit by the criminal investigators.
Now, one of the things that people often forget, because there's so much information that comes at them, give us the ballpark figure of what SARS paid Bain to supposedly overhaul the organization, and what was the consequence of that overhaul, both in personnel terms and financial terms?
Well, we mentioned the amount that he paid, just over 200 million, includes the principal plus the interest. The impact of their work is the portion that we say is incalculable, the damage thereof. So what happened is, firstly, by the organizational dismantling of well-tried and tested institutional arrangements like the Large Business Center, the High Court Litigation Unit, the Integrity Unit in SARS, the Illicit Economy Unit, by disaggregating and dismantling that, we lost the focus and really the ability to pursue the audit and criminal investigation work related to that. That, therefore, has had a direct bearing on the quality of the work and then consequently the decline in revenue. In addition to that, because of this new culture, a culture quite blatantly, and it still pervades, of fear and intimidation, many people felt ostracized. They were marginalized. 60 very senior people I have now replaced into meaningful work, but they were just marginalized into meaningless work. Many had left the organization. We lost, between that period, almost 3,000 of our employees. Many of them would be skills that are of a hard technical audit and risk profiling skill. And so, first of all, the organizational arrangement was depleted, an exodus of staff, and then the soft issue is so important that you then seize the entire organization in a culture of fear and intimidation, and everyone is too afraid. More than 700 people were suspended in that period and dealt with. Many of that we're still dealing with now. And so the composite, the compound effect has placed SARS in a position where the work of rebuilding SARS will require persistent effort, a significant amount of time, and just a relentless pursuit, even in the face of all the distractions that we're experiencing.
Talking about distractions, one of the issues that keeps on raising its head is the supposed allegation that you had a rogue unit that was operating in SARS. Now, the EFF has persisted with this, and so has the Public Protector. The Nugent Commission of Inquiry found something completely different. There's also moves afoot to discuss the fitness of the Public Protector to hold office. We're going to discuss that in the next segment with our other guests. But how does your recommendation to not do work with Bain that specifically, dislodged some of these units that existed, how does it impact on this insistence of political parties such as the EFF and the Public Protector, which is a Chapter 9 institution, that this unit was existing and that it acted illegally?
So I'm not going to comment on the motives of any political party or the Public Protector's Office. I respect democracy. I'm a constitutional Democrat. I respect the office. I think the public will judge them, and I think to the extent that we test some of the outcomes in court, it will give clarity to that. However, at the moment, Karima, I have to focus on the work and not be distracted. In respect of the allegations around a so-called rogue unit, I can't comment on that. But this is what I can say with certainty, that the Tax Administration Act and the Customs Act gives very specific powers to SARS to conduct investigations, to gather information, and to pursue from a very gentle request for information to more intrusive means of getting information, to going to court and using statutory powers to conduct certain surveillances in public areas.
Yes.
So as long as SARS, we act within the prescript of the law, which is very clear and governs our behavior, and do it single-mindedly for the purpose of tax and customs administration and enforcement, I must add, we are comfortable that those powers allow us to do what we need to do. I cannot speak to the behavior of individuals that are currently under the investigation of the Public Protector, but as far as even those matters are tried and tested in court, that will give us clarity. For now, we are not going to be distracted by that. We have work to do.
Okay, so we've discussed Bain's. Let's talk about Gartner. What was the damage that they did, and Hogan Lovells in particular? I've interviewed representatives from Hogan Lovells, and they very sheepishly did an about turn. But it was actually quite critical because they were responsible in part for the return of the number 2 at SARS at the time of Mr. Moyane's tenure. And of course, we had 75 instances of monies that were deposited into Mr. Makwakwa's account that was actually flagged by the FIC. And Hogan Lovells was part of a big cover-up of that.
Yeah, I mean, let me deal with Gartner first. So unlike Bain, Gartner did not agree to refund or return any monies. That is a matter that is still currently...
But what was their reason?
Well, their reasons is that the work that they did had value, but that because of an inability of SARS to implement that work, no value was derived for SARS. We are challenging just that very notion, and so that's the civil conversation that's going. And in addition, we are referring them also... one has a strong sense that there was premeditation, and that to the extent that there was knowledge of the intent, that they should be held accountable and as complicit to that. So we also have referred that for criminal investigation by the DPCI. And we are very clear we will pursue that. As far as Logan Lovells is concerned, that was the matter that they were involved in with the case you mentioned, and there's also a process to recover the monies that was paid in that regard. And clearly, I'm not going to discuss the detail of an employee or a former employee in this regard, but we will continue to pursue that as well. And to the extent that they have to answer both civilly and criminally, we will pursue that.
Now, you've spoken about these big multinationals, but what about organizations such as McKinsey, such as KPMG? KPMG's reputation is basically shot, even though there are attempts by the firm to kind of rebrand and recalibrate itself. Do you include them in the list of companies that you are recommending to Treasury that government places a ban on working with them?
At this point, we have referred specifically organizations who are found specifically criminally culpable that we should not do business with them. So I'm not going to prejudge these companies. I think, though, that beyond SARS, the principle should apply, that where a company or a firm has been complicit in the capture of state, that they should answer, and the harshest sanction where it applies, is that they should be excluded from doing government work.
Now, there's been a lot of focus on government complicity around state capture and how elected representatives have stolen money. But business and big companies such as Bain, such as Hogan Lovells, such as KPMG have often gotten off the hook. They've paid some of the monies back. But just recently, for example, Amabungani found how the trillion millions, made their way out of the country and how they were actually diverted by the Guptas. And they, for the first time, found a genuine link between the money transfers and one of the Gupta brothers. Why is it so important that we hold financial institutions, advisory services, auditing companies accountable for their role in the destruction of an institution such as SARS, which is, of course, vital for the state to provide goods and services to the communities?
Well, you should add to that tax practitioners as well,
yes,
because very often some of these financial statements and the tax admissions are prepared by that profession as well. So first of all, for us, behind the work we do, we place a human face. And it's very often the face of the most vulnerable in society. We serve the higher purpose of enabling government to provide goods and services to those, to the entire society, but in particular to the most vulnerable in society. And we think it is unforgivable, inexcusable, that anyone, whether government or private, and many private players and professional firms, as you say, have been complicit in this, we think it's inexcusable that any of them should be let off the hook, because the damage will be suffered. We have suffered personal damage in our own family,
yes,
with some of my family having to leave South Africa because of the state of violence and lawlessness that characterizes our country at the moment. We've become a country that we are fighting with each other rather than for each other. And so that scourge that has recharacterized our society, which was led by a noble purpose and currently is characterized by corruption, we should take the action to allow that it never ever happens again, and certainly not under our watch.
Okay, so let's talk about your plans to turn the organization around. Now, you've gone in and you have obviously got a massive task on your hands. Talk to us about what you've done in the immediate and what are your more medium to long-term plans to actually recalibrate and make SARS efficient again and make it work in the interests of the people.
I wish I had a lot of time to tell you this, but there are three streams of work. The first is obviously the 30-odd recommendations of the Nugent Commission. We are pursuing that with diligence and making good progress as far as that's concerned. But if I only did that, I would be depressed because it's really recovery work, it's necessary work, but it's not energizing work. The second piece of work is we have put in place a very specific revenue recovery program. We've identified 6 projects. Yesterday, when the rest of you were watching rugby, we met with the Davis Tax Committee, and this time we are embedding operational resources so that the work that we do under that project, we can immediately harvest low-hanging fruit and begin to put some revenue recovery programs in there.
Do you have a ballpark figure for what that low-hanging fruit will bring in?
Well, we will certainly, we are in the process of calculating that so that by the Minister's October budget speech we will be clearer about that. But we certainly will go all out to recover the monies that are lost. And so we're not going to make a forecast at this stage. We're finalizing that forecast in the next week or so. But we can tell you that there are opportunities to recover some of the lost revenue in the short term. And so those 6 projects have been, if we have time, I can give you some color of that. But let me quickly do the third stream of work, is the real energizing and inspirational work, is envisioning what SARS could be like. So we formulated a Vision 2024 to be a smart, modern SARS that acts beyond reproach with unquestionable integrity, that can be trusted and admired. Each of those terms are deliberately chosen to recalibrate, repurpose, and retool SARS. Alongside that, we have a strategic intent to follow a voluntary compliance approach, and that is served by 9 very specific strategic objectives. We are busy formulating that, and we'll make that plan public towards the end of October when we table it in Parliament. And so these are the three streams of work. In respect of some of the more immediate work, we also have to start re-engaging our staff, a process that I've already commenced. I've met with 90% of our staff in the last while, listening to them, and also regaining and rebuilding trust. But you know, the best thing to turn around morale is to start winning.
Yes.
And so therefore the short-term revenue recovery is important while we work to re-evaluate and reformulate our value proposition and an engagement program for our staff. And then also to reach out, we've already in the process of bringing back some of the people who have left SARS in order to bolster up our capability.
A final question to you. When the Minister of Finance addresses us in October, when he delivers his medium-term budget forecast, what will he be able to tell us about the capacity of SARS to actually reinstate tax morality, if you like, tax compliance, and what will the figure be that he will be able to report in terms of, how far you are in terms of closing the gap between that deficit that we have?
We're going to leave the gap to the Minister, and we are working with the Treasury team towards that. But the Minister will be able to confidently say that the work of rebuilding SARS has begun. It is making steady progress. It's going to take time. Fixing the soft infrastructure is much harder than fixing the long infrastructure. The Minister will tell you that SARS will be capacitated with the necessary resources to hire the necessary people, to invest in the necessary technology, and to turn around an organization which was crippled. And the Minister will be able to say that confidently, and we will specifically be able to report against that.
All right. Thank you so very much, Commissioner Kieswetter, for joining us here on The Fix. I must wish you good luck. It's a very huge task you have ahead, but of course something that we need in the country. Thank you so very much to Commissioner Kieswetter. After the break, we talk to you about the fact that rules are being made to look at how we can remove a head of a Chapter 9 institution. Stay with us.